let's finish up with reform real quick. I don't want to get into the ins and outs of the politics of it because I think the big picture part of this is a little more interesting. And we're going to look, we know the way this is going. At some point, reform's probably going to get a turn at the wheel, whether it's a called election in the next year or two, 2029, whatever the situation is. My outside opinion, and just because we've all seen history, is groups like Reform, they work really, really great in opposition. And then once they get their turn at the wheel and they get into power themselves, especially a new party whose actual structure is a little bit questionable, and I don't mean that in a good or bad way, it's just it's new and they don't have the infrastructure the old parties do. When and if Reform gets a majority and gets a prime minister and gets in the power in the House, they're not going to automatically get buys on any of the ongoing issues. In fact, they're probably going to have more pressure on them because they're expressly getting there to fix them. Do you see Reform having a viable path to fixing some of these problems, or is the rhetoric just going to run into a brick wall and we get more of a mess? Project this out a couple of years beyond just the noise of right now, where you think Reform is going.
To be completely honest with you, I don't know. And a few months ago, when people would ask me this, I would say Reform are in no way a serious party of government. But I know from sources within Reform that they're stepping up their policy making machine. They've got people inside the party who are coming up with actual meaningful policies. So that would make me think, to some extent, maybe there is an argument saying that they are actually prepared for government. But the counter to that argument, which is what people up and down the country are talking about, is that the policies that they are coming out with are simply ridiculous. So a few months ago, Nigel Farage established his economic plan and his financial plan for a possible reform government, and he wanted to propose a number of changes. So, for example, raising the minimum rate of income tax from what it currently is at about £12,000 per year to £20,000, raising the top level of income tax, removing the two-child benefit cap, restoring winter fuel allowance, etc., etc. And overall, these spending commitments amounted to about 80 to 90 billion pounds. Yet at the same time, the cuts that he was proposing, so for example, to DEI, to asylum seekers, to asylum seekers claiming hotels, for example, to net zero costs, all of these things actually amount to roughly 20 billion pounds, if that. So this is a party that's claiming to be a serious contender for government, and yet is coming up with tens of billions of pounds of unspended tax breaks, of unspended tax cuts. And if those are the economic policies that this party is coming out with, then I think we just have to turn around and say that they're not necessarily a serious party for government, and they're not a serious contender for government.
And if that happens, then where does it leave us? Because if you have a third party, look, third parties come and go over history anytime you have a two-party system, whether it's the US or the UK. Is there any way that that happens that doesn't end up with everything being worse than it currently is now? Because just historically looking, if you have a populist party, for lack of a better term, rise up, we're going to fix it, we don't fix it, they recede back, there's no way that ends better than where we are now, right?
I mean, yes and no. I think there's an argument to saying that in the event that Reform do come to power and they mess up as badly as I'm anticipating them to mess up, then people are going to turn around and say, well, maybe it's these centrist parties that we've had for the last few hundred years, maybe they're not so bad and maybe we should return to them. But at the same time, I just really do not believe that this is a serious party for government, that they're a good party for government. And it's often the case with populist parties that they're reliant on sound bites and not actual policies. It's one thing for Nigel Farage and Richard Tice and others to turn around and say, well, we're going to solve this problem, this problem, this problem. It's this easy. If it was that easy, would previous governments, not have already accomplished this? And I think they're going in with these rose-tinted glasses, believing that things will be much easier for them than they actually are. And I think in the event that they do win the election, they're going to be faced with that reality. And people are going to see Reform for what they really are, which is just a party that's built on soundbites and not actual policy.
Political question based off of that, then. There's been some polling, there's been some discussion, especially since the last round of council elections here, week or so ago. There's some concern that reform, and I've heard people that are very pro-reform talking about this privately, that they are starting to top out in polling a little bit, that they're about as popular as they can possibly get. Is there discussion of is this as popular as they're going to get because of infrastructure? There's, of course, Nigel Farage is a very controversial figure. There's people that say even if he found a way to Downing Street, he would have a pretty hard ceiling on how much support he's going to get just because of his career and so forth. Is there a discussion that the Reform Party as it currently exists may be at the kind of the peak it's going to be, that if it's going to take that next step to a serious party, and they're starting to get some serious people flip over to them, and if they got power, they'd get even more because that's just politics. Is there a discussion that it's going to have to be the next generation and the next crop of reform, not necessarily the one that brought it to the fore, for it to be more than what it is now?
Yes, and I think that's not necessarily too crazy of an idea to believe in, or an idea to take forward. Even, the Conservative and Labour Party, when they're topping out polling numbers, when they're the top of the polls, they normally sit anywhere from between 30 and 40%, and that's exactly where Reform are sitting now. It's very rare, I think, with the exception of maybe Tony Blair or maybe Margaret Thatcher, that these parties will ever reach more than 40% of the popular votes, or the projected seats. So the fact that Reform is sitting at about 30% to 35% makes me think that that's the highest that they're going to achieve. Now, we are seeing with the creation of, for example, Jeremy Corbyn's new party, they don't yet have a name for it, but Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana have established a new party, which is supposed to rival the Labour vote. That, again, paves the way for a Reform victory in 2029. If Labour's vote splits and these hard left voters are going to turn to Jeremy Corbyn's party and vote for them instead of Labour, it's going to open a door for Reform to just walk straight in. And so when you're combining that with these polling numbers, with the popularity that we're seeing across the country, with the success in local elections, it's looking as though Reform are gaining momentum. And it's actually a case of, when is this momentum going to stop?
Yeah, I was really hoping we were done with the Jeremy Corbyn coverage, but alas, we are doomed, apparently. Oliver Dean, fantastic insight. Really appreciate it. I want to